I ain't trying to be cool. Why you trying to be cute? I ain't got it smooth.
When Bridget reached out to me, she was like, oh, I want to hear, a story about, social justice, activism in Harlem, right? What has your experience been? And I figured I might as well tell the story of my first social justice campaign. So I was 4. My family, they all come from Puerto Rico. So my family came here in the 50s and 60s during Operation Bootstrap, which was basically the process of the neoliberal economic model being tested on Puerto Rico before getting shipped out here. So instead of becoming an independent nation and developing its own economy, it ended up becoming closer to the United States and doing everything it could to bring in more resources and outside resources and outside companies to Puerto Rico. That meant a large group of people had to leave. The economy was never meant to sustain everybody. And so my family is, they're some of the ones who the plan was never meant to sustain. And so they all ended up in public housing. And on my dad's side, they ended up in Lehman Houses in East Harlem. About a year after it was built in '62, it was, it was kind of nice. They had running water and bathrooms in like each apartment, which was a luxury in New York at that time. And one of the things it also had was a playground. And so when I was a kid in elementary school, I ended up going to an elementary school right next to the public housing complex that my grandfather went to and that my dad was born in. And it was nice to me. It was the place that I'd grown up at. And one of the things that kind of upset me, though, about the whole place was the kids weren't that nice to everything there. For instance, there was a whale there. I'm a city kid straight through and through, so nature and green things is not normal for me. I slept under a tree for the first time. Didn't even sleep. I just rested without a blanket for 30 minutes. The first time that happened was legitimately 2 months ago in Boston. And so there was this whale there, and it was, of course, NYCHA, right? It's this concrete slab painted green with lead-based paint, right? To call this a whale is honestly a stretch. It takes a child's imagination. But it was a pretty dope toy. How many people say they get to play with a whale when they're a kid? And the only issue was that the kids didn't really take care of the thing. They would always, chip it and write on it and leave their gum on it. And I'd created this whole narrative as to what this whale was in my head because I was 4 and I didn't have many friends. So I spent a lot of time alone. But I was upset about it, and so I decided to do something about it, and I decided to talk to some of my friends and see, well, what do you think about, that whale? No one's really taking care of it. So I started to organize some friends to actually get together and try and save this whale. It was really not well thought out. Mainly, again, I was fat, didn't have many friends. At this time, I'm still picking my nose. So I'm not really connecting with folks. In fact, it's really only about 3 or 4 people who could stand me that were even participating in this. I was appreciative though. It was dope. Every day we would go out and stand on the whale and protect it from others. We'd clean it, and it was just something to pass the time. But I was pretty committed to it. But most kids weren't really involved. And eventually, this one girl named Brittany, who I'm embarrassed to say to this day, she could maybe still kick my ass. I mean, at the time, she was about a foot taller than me, and she didn't really like me very much. She thought I was a dweeb. She thought, she always said that I was always trying to talk white. That was the thing that she told me. She said, you're always trying to talk white. And I wasn't trying to talk white. My parents just, they made me read the New York Times magazine as a punishment. I don't know why, but they made me do that. So then I would start saying words that no one knew because I was an asshole, and then people would be an asshole to me, and it was kind of a reoccurring cycle. But yeah, so I remember she stepped up and she was like, oh, y'all want to save the whale? Bet. So she started organizing a counter campaign called Kill the Whale. So she starts organizing all these students to go out and attack the whale at recess. She has a lot more friends than I do. And in due time, there were 10, 15 kids kicking the living crap out of this big cement whale with lead-based paint all over it. And it hurt. And I remember that I'd actually forgotten this. I didn't even remember this story until like October of last year. I was going to Ferguson and actually involved in an actual social justice movement, not just something I created in my head. And one of the filmmakers in the van down to Ferguson was actually one of my best friends in elementary school. She'd gone on to have a pretty dope career as a filmmaker herself. She did the film a couple years ago. They got a lot of attention where they lined up the dolls, the black dolls and the white dolls, and they asked little kids like, which do you think is prettier? And all of the young kids of color chose the white dolls. She did that piece. Was kind of a re-up of an experiment that had been done a while back. And so she's in the car, and she later on tells me this story, and like we're laughing about it, and she's like, yeah, that was one of the most traumatizing experiences of my life. And I'm like, I know, right? They went out and killed the whale. And she was like, no, that wasn't the traumatizing experience. I was like, well, what was it? She was like, whoa, that you joined them. And I was like, what? And she's like, yeah. Yeah, see, they one day were killing the whale, and you got to the playground, and you saw them killing the whale. You took a moment, you looked at them, and you looked at us, and you joined them. And I remembered that she was right. Like I was just so embarrassed and ashamed. I didn't have many friends at the time. I certainly, wasn't doing much better right now. And I just didn't want to be alone. I didn't want to admit that I'd lost control. And I joined them. And I remember two frames in my head. It's the moment of jumping on to attack the whale and then looking at my friends and seeing them like, and so yeah, I mean, it hurt, as I look back on it, I realized that I had kind of mistook what was most important at that time, right? As a 4-year-old, all I could think about was this campaign I'd organized that was a failure, an abject failure, right? But I wasn't thinking about the bigger picture, because at the end of the day, those kids were killing the whale, but it was a concrete structure that wouldn't eventually go away until NYCHA decided to put some other equally as dangerous children's toy in that playground. And I wasn't really saving the whale because it was this concrete slab with lead paint on it, and I probably shouldn't have been there anyway in the first place. But what I had lost and forgotten about or not really put much stock in was the few people that were actually there with me. They weren't really there with me because they necessarily cared whether this concrete structure was there or not, but they were with me because they truly cared for and loved me. And they cared about the relationships that we'd built. And so when I got caught up with having lost that campaign and lost that control and went against the few people that really cared about me at that time, remember I said I picked my nose a lot, there were very few people. I forgot about what was important, because at the end of the day, regardless of what campaign you're in or whether you win or lose, it's the people that you meet along the way, and it's the relationships you form that last long beyond it. And that's something that I didn't really realize until she shamed me a couple months ago. But the same thing has rung true. Like, after coming back from Ferguson, I was like, yeah, people are still getting killed. Like, young men of color are still getting killed. I saw the cops chase down a 14-year-old. There's one cop, actually, from PSA 5 that continues. Every time I meet him, he's chasing a 14-year-old. He's just running around the place chasing children. So that's still there. But the last time that it happened, I was with a squad of like 20 cop watchers. Like, we were patrolling the neighborhood, and we were actually able to make sure that those kids got home safe. And for the one kid that did get picked up, we were able to give him legal support and actually let his parents know what had happened. And so, but besides that, like, yeah, but that kid still went in, and that cop from PSA 5 still has a job. But what's most important, I think, is just the relationships that you build along the way. Like, we're gonna be doing a cop watch training tomorrow at 1 Corinthians. Thursday at 1 Corinthians, 6:30, in case anyone's interested. But, you know, beyond that, like, I really respect and love the bond that I've formed with Julian, even though it's, you know, we don't know each other all that well. He's one of the wonderful people that I've gotten to meet along the way that I hope to continue building with. And I've met a bunch of other people like that. And that's what I'm trying to put stock on and focus on, you know, going forward, irrespective of whether the whale is saved or killed or whatever movement survives or doesn't. So that's the first time I ever shared that story. I hope it was all right. I just felt ashamed because as a 4-year-old, I was kind of a shithead. So, but I try to remember it now just to remind myself to be better. So, thank you.
I ain't trying to be cool. Why you trying to be cute? I ain't gotta be smooth. I ain't trying to be rude. I'm just trying to see you move your body with someone so clap with me. So clap with me. I ain't gotta be smooth. I ain't trying to be rude. I'm just trying to see you move your body with someone so clap with me. So clap with me. I ain't gotta be smooth. I ain't trying to be rude. I'm just trying to see you move your body with someone so clap with me. Let the kids hit, let the drums drum. F your sickness, F the hump drum.